Hola chicos, it's Brad Gorman here again. Hey, welcome to this week's Open Circle. This week, Kat Miller will introduce our presenter.
This week's presentation, A Shot in the Dark, presented by Phil Rylett. Vaccines were once heralded as the savior from the scourge of infectious diseases. The worry of once commonplace and devastating diseases could be eliminated by a widespread program of vaccinations. Then why, a couple of generations later, are vaccinations feared and opposed with the same fervor as the diseases they allegedly prevent? Phil will look at one particular vaccination program that has gained so much notoriety that even the U.S. president has weighed in on the issue. The story might surprise us. Phil takes a look at the intriguing story behind the scenes of a vaccination that today is mired in controversy. Phil Rylett has spent his entire career in healthcare, first as a pharmacologist, then as a nurse, and then managing a statewide program for early detection of breast and cervical cancer. Please join me in welcoming Phil.
Okay, who came today wondering if they would catch diseases like measles, mumps, German measles, diphtheria, whooping cough, polio? And yet there have been measles cases in Mexico. Last year, 54 people were diagnosed with mumps in Mexico, a significant increase over a year before. And just a few weeks ago in Washington State, 50 people were diagnosed with measles, prompting a state of emergency. These and other diseases that we rarely hear about and worry even less about have not gone away. They're still with us. Apart from smallpox, which has been eradicated from the face of the planet, diseases which we thought only existed in the past are still around us. So why aren't we as sick as we were in the past? Why aren't we sick as we were a few generations ago? Why is there no widespread panic of a devastating outbreak as in the past? Well, here's a clue. The Pan American Health Organization declared Mexico free of rubella, or German measles, because of the constant application for the past 15 years of vaccination against the disease. So why is there so much controversy? Why have vaccinations become such a lightning rod for criticism of public health care? Yesterday, I'll be talking about vaccines. And while decades ago, at the time they were first introduced, you could never imagine that they would spark such controversy. But here we are today in a situation where battles are fought over their use. Today, we'll be focusing on one vaccine program designed to prevent 3 diseases: mumps, measles, and rubella, otherwise known as the MMR vaccine, the name taken from the initials of the disease. The first M in MMR stands for mumps, a disease caused by a virus which results in the painful swelling of your salivary glands, hence the swollen neck. It also causes inflammation of the ovaries and testicles, and adult males can be rendered sterile following a bout of mumps. The next M is for measles. Now, measles is a highly contagious infectious disease caused by the measles virus. Complications occur in about 30% of cases and may include blindness, inflammation of the brain, pneumonia, and death. In the US in 1963, the year before the vaccine was available, there were about 4 million cases of measles. Each year, about 1,000 people died. 48,000 were hospitalized, and 1,000 suffered brain swelling. And most deaths were of children under the age of 5 years old. Now, the R stands for rubella, commonly known as German measles. Like mumps, before vaccination, it was a very common disease. The disease is often mild. Half of the people don't even realize they're infected. The main problem was infection during early pregnancy. The child had a high chance of being born with serious complications: blindness, deafness, serious heart disease, and as well as other abnormalities in the brain, liver, and bone. The MMR vaccine is a shot containing all 3 vaccines. Administering them in 3 separate doses does not reduce the chance of adverse effects and just increases the chance of catching one of the other diseases before all are given. For that reason, they're administered together. So it seems straightforward, right? So why is this a controversial subject? Why are people so passionate against vaccination programs? Even the President of the United States has weighed in on this. And why is MMR in particular the target of anti-vaccination organizations? To answer this question, we start our journey in Texas. So a couple of years ago, one cold January morning, the Graceview Baptist Church in Tomball, Texas, was filling up with people to hear a talk on autism. Now, autism is a complex neurobehavioral condition, usually noticed in a child between 1 and 3 years old, and includes impairments in social, behavior, and language development. The speaker, Andrew Wakefield, was a high-profile but controversial figure in gastroenterology research at the Royal Free Hospital in London, when in 1998, he had concerns about the safety of the MMR vaccine and its relationship to the onset of autism. A crowd of about 250 people showed up to listen. And when he took the podium, the audience of members, mostly parents of autistic children, stood and applauded wildly. After the talk, a line of visitors snaked down the hallway, his followers waiting to have a photo with him or have him sign a book he wrote about his experience and his convictions. 2 armed guards stood prominently inside the doorway of the sanctuary. They had been hired by the organizer to protect Wakefield, just to make a statement, she said. Now, what did this man do to warrant such accolades, but apparently needing this level of protection? Well, the story starts several years earlier in Norfolk, England, where a high street solicitor by the name of Richard Barr saw an ad that had been placed by a woman whose son had become seriously ill soon after receiving his MMR shot. The woman was recruiting other parents whose children had suffered a similar illness so they could compare experiences and collect damages. Barr thought that this might be a good class action suit in the making. He contacted the group and started to look for ways that parents could gain compensation. Conveniently, he could be compensated through the UK government program Legal Aid, which made money available to low-income families to pay their lawyer. The only problem was that that there was no actual evidence that MMR vaccine caused any of the problems. It could have been coincidence. He needed someone who could conduct a study to prove the connection between the vaccine and the medical problems. Now, about the same time in London, a doctor named Andrew Wakefield was being approached by the head of an organization called Allergy-Induced Autism that believed that food allergies caused autism. She described how her son William had deteriorated at age 15 months from a healthy developing toddler into a withdrawn, incommunicative child who screamed throughout the night, and now his bowels were on fire with constant diarrhea and pain. All of this had started, she said, within days after William received the MMR shot. In the end, Wakefield, a specialist in intestinal disease, did more than just listen. He came up with the hypothesis that William and other victims were suffering from a unique form of intestinal disorder related to their autism that might have been triggered by the MMR vaccine. He also claimed that the vaccine might be one reason for the soaring rates of autism in the developed world over the past 2 decades. Barr, the lawyer who wanted to file the class action lawsuit, read about this hypothesis and contacted Wakefield for his expertise. The two men met in 1996, and Barr persuaded Dr. Wakefield to sign a contract. The contract would have Wakefield investigate the claims that would back up the lawsuit. Wakefield agreed to conduct clinical scientific research into the MMR vaccine with the goal of finding new evidence of a new syndrome. In order to gather evidence for this syndrome, Wakefield and Barr started to give media interviews to recruit parents whose children had suspicious symptoms that would support the existence of the syndrome. The following are signs to look for. Barr would then give a list of common intestinal disease symptoms and mental issues. If your child has suffered from all or any of these, please contact us, and it may be appropriate for us to put you in touch with Dr. Wakefield. In the end, 1,600 families signed up with the lawyer. Both Barr and Wakefield were making a tidy income from their work, paid on behalf of the families by the UK Legal Aid Fund. In 1997, Wakefield received almost $1 million from Barr for his work. Now, Wakefield got to work devising a study that would show the existence of this new syndrome. He devised a study at the hospital of 12 children with various mental problems who had all been given the MMR vaccine. Now, no one in the hospital knew of this secondary source of income, which was clearly represented a conflict of interest. And Wakefield never declared it. One mother whose child showed the first signs of autism a few months after receiving the MMR vaccine saw the commercial by Barr, who referred her to Dr. Wakefield. Her child was admitted to the hospital and endured a grueling battery of tests and investigations. The next day, Wakefield announced that the young boy might have Crohn's disease, a particularly nasty type of intestinal disease. Wakefield then produced a remarkable document. It was an 11-page draft of a business plan based on a patent Wakefield had filed, claiming that Crohn's disease, or ulcerative colitis, may be diagnosed by detecting measles virus in bowel tissue. It proposed starting a company that could reap huge returns from diagnostic tests. It predicted a turnover from Britain and America of up to $100 million a year. As it turned out later, the child who was undergoing these tests did not have Crohn's disease. But undaunted, Wakefield met with 3 other colleagues at the hospital to discuss his business plan. So to sum up, Dr. Wakefield signed a contract to do a study to find a new syndrome that implicated the MMR vaccine. He wasn't asked to find out whether a syndrome actually existed, but to prove that it did. This syndrome was needed for the lawyer, Barr, to sue the vaccine manufacturers on behalf of families that Barr and Wakefield have recruited via TV, radio, and press. Barr collected the money from legal aid, the government program, to pay for the study. Wakefield and Barr then filed a patent for a test that could measure the presence of this new, as yet undiscovered, syndrome. I'm sorry, but it gets murkier. In 1998, Wakefield filed another patent, this time for a standalone measles vaccine. However, he knew that his measles virus vaccine would not be profitable as long as the MMR was popular. MMR was dominant in the healthcare space, and public confidence for its safety was high. For Wakefield to enjoy financial success with his vaccine, MMR had to be discredited. In a publicity video distributed by the Royal Free Hospital, Wakefield claimed that MMR injection caused an inflammatory bowel disease that could lead to brain damage. Wakefield's study was published in The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical publications in Britain. Still, no one knew that his work had been funded by a lawyer, suing the manufacturers of the MMR vaccine. As an alternative, Wakefield offered his own vaccine, which he claimed would not only protect the recipient against measles, but would also treat the problems created by the MMR vaccine. Clearly, Dr. Wakefield was not against vaccines, but only against the combination that was a rival to his own patented vaccine. There was understandably a lot of media attention and a press conference was called. In the build-up to the press conference, the hospital installed extra phone lines and distributed to broadcasters a 23-minute video release showcasing Wakefield's claims. In the video, he states, quote, "There is sufficient anxiety in my own mind of the safety of the MMR vaccine in combination that I think it should be suspended in favor of the single vaccine," unquote. The press conference and the video boosted his commercial plans, which were running smoothly behind the scenes. 2 weeks later, with money from venture capitalists, he submitted a 13-page proposal to launch a joint business with the medical school. The revised business plan was ambitious. He hoped to raise $2.5 million from investors, and the money would be used to develop a commercial test for the new syndrome he had found and for individual vaccines. The business was to be launched off the back of the vaccine scare. It included the diagnosis of a new syndrome, which Wakefield dubbed autistic enterocolitis. A new syndrome was necessary, as it turned out that Crohn's disease wasn't found in any of the children in the Lancet study. The business prospectus estimated that by year 3, income from this testing for this new syndrome could be about $35 million. But for all the preparations and presentations to the investors, one critical issue was not broached: that the company's ambitious products might not work. After all, this was a plan to sell a cure for a disease that had been named by the same doctor diagnosing the disease. But Wakefield had promoted the business side so heavily that no one had looked at the science underpinning his claims. The unraveling began after the arrival at the school of a new head of medicine, Mark Pepys. In 1999, Pepys summoned Wakefield to the hospital's central London headquarters and challenged Wakefield over his scheme, then on the verge of fruition. He was given a 2-page letter by the hospital. Quote, "We remain concerned about a possible serious conflict of interest between your academic employment at the hospital and your business operations. This concern arose originally because the company's business plan appears to depend on premature, scientifically unjustified publication of results which do not conform to the rigorous academic and scientific standards that are generally expected," unquote. In other words, no one had ever verified the results of Wakefield's studies. When Wakefield could not produce evidence that his diagnostic theory actually existed, he said, quote, "I have been asked to go because my research results are unpopular," unquote. He would later allege sinister conspiracies to stop him revealing what he claimed were vaccine secrets. But Wakefield wasn't asked to go. He was asked to confirm or refute robustly, reliably, and above all reproducibly, the possible causal relationships between MMR vaccine and autism, or autistic enterocolitis as he had postulated. And at the time, Wakefield agreed. Then the hospital waited. It prompted. Waited longer. Prompted again. 3 months have elapsed, the hospital wrote to him in March 2000, asking for a progress report on the study proposed, and not to make any public statements in the meantime. But the study did not happen. The Lancet research had been a sham. Trying to replicate it with greater numbers would have been hopeless. The General Medical Council, which is responsible for licensing doctors and supervising medical ethics in the UK, investigated the affair. Wakefield was found to have acted dishonestly and irresponsibly, and to have acted with callous disregard for the children involved in his study, conducting unnecessary and invasive tests. In April of 2010, the British Medical Journal investigated the laboratory aspects of his findings, recounting how normal clinical results in the hospital were later changed in the medical school to the abnormal results published in the Lancet. Wakefield had fabricated abnormal results. This essentially was a fatal blow and cast doubt on the autistic enterocolitis that Wakefield had claimed to have discovered. The General Medical Council found Wakefield guilty of serious professional misconduct, 4 counts of dishonesty, and 12 involving the abuse of developmentally challenged children, and ordered that he be struck off the medical register, meaning he could no longer practice as a doctor in the UK. The Lancet fully retracted Wakefield's paper. Its editor-in-chief described it as utterly false and said that the journal had been deceived. The British Medical Journal described the original paper as fraudulent. The scientific consensus is that the MMR vaccine has no link to the development of autism, and this vaccine's benefits greatly outweigh its risks. It went on to describe Wakefield's paper as perhaps the most damaging medical hoax of the last 100 years. Physicians, medical journals, and editors have described Wakefield's actions as fraudulent and have tied them to epidemics and deaths. With his theories debunked and his medical license revoked, what was Wakefield to do next? He went to the USA, where he found a warm welcome from anti-vaccination groups. He conveniently dropped his patent for his vaccine and now makes a living promoting his discredited theories in the US, something he partly credits to the rise of social media. Facebook groups have joined conspiratorial anti-vaccination groups, which researchers believe could keep the movement durable on a global scale. Wakefield declared, quote, "In the USA, it's become so polarized now, no one knows quite what to believe. So people are turning increasingly to social media," unquote. A couple of years ago, Wakefield was directly linked to a large outbreak of measles among the Somali American community in Minnesota, after he visited and shared his views with them. After his visit, the community, which traditionally had a vaccination rate better than most of the state, they saw it drop from 92% to 40%. And that year, the state experienced almost 80 cases of measles, the highest number for decades, and more than the average for the entire US. 20 of those Somali Americans required hospital treatment. Public confidence in the MMR has never recovered, and at least not in developed countries. And it was made evident by the recent news that the number of measles cases in Europe increased 400% in 2017, with 20,000 cases and 35 deaths. So why would there exist a global cabal of doctors and health advocates conspiring to damage your children including their own. Big Pharma? Well, the CDC price list shows the cost of the MMR vaccine is $21. And the vaccines comprise only 1 to 2% of global pharmaceutical sales. During the past 50 years, the number of pharmaceutical companies making vaccines has decreased dramatically. And those that still make vaccines have reduced resources to make new ones. Pharmaceutical companies are gradually abandoning vaccines because the research, development, testing, and manufacture are expensive. And the market to sell vaccines is much smaller than the market for other drug products. In fact, vaccines were the first group of medical products that were almost nearly eliminated by lawsuits. In 1974, a British researcher published a paper in which he claimed that the pertussis vaccine was responsible for permanent brain damage in a young child. Pertussis is whooping cough. So stories that pertussis vaccine harmed children soon appeared in the United States, and personal injury lawyers sued vaccine manufacturers. By 1987, there were 800 lawsuits, totaling more than $21 million. And new claims were filed every week. To meet the demand for increased liability insurance and pay for legal fees and settlements, the cost of the pertussis vaccine increased from 17 cents per dose to $11 per dose. By the early 1990s, many investigators examined the question raised by the British researcher, and they found that his hypothesis was wrong. Pertussis did not cause brain swelling. And even he admitted that. But the damage was done. The number of companies making the pertussis vaccine for US children decreased from 4, Wyeth, Connaught, Sclavo, and Lederle, to just 1, Lederle. In the mid-1980s, a lawsuit against Lederle claiming that pertussis vaccine caused paralysis in a young boy ended with an award of over $1 million. This award was equivalent to more than half the entire pertussis vaccine market, although there was no scientific evidence to support the claim. Well, pharmaceutical companies looked at the situation and decided to get out of the business. Lederle wanted to quit making the pertussis vaccine, and as they were the only manufacturer remaining, this would have threatened a return to the pre-vaccine era and a return to epidemics of whooping cough. The US government had to act. So in 1986, Congress passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which included the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, designed to protect companies from lawsuits not supported by scientific evidence. In many ways, the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program was a model system to prevent abuses by personal injury lawyers. Scientists, epidemiologists, virologists, microbiologists, clinicians, and statisticians reviewed scientific studies and recommended to the courts which problems were caused by vaccines and which coincidentally followed the vaccine. If a child suffered a reaction from the pertussis vaccine or any vaccine, it was the family was compensated for medical expenses and damages quickly, generously, and fairly. And because of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, manufacturers remained in the vaccine business, and the number of lawsuits against the vaccine makers declined substantially. So this brings us to the present day. Since Trump's election, Wakefield's campaign has found fresh momentum. In the summer of 2016, Wakefield met with Trump. Trump confirmed that the MMR vaccination was harmful because he had personal knowledge. He did not elaborate, but I think we all know who knows more about vaccines than anyone. Wakefield attended one of his inauguration balls after Trump won the presidential election. And Wakefield posted a video from one of the balls calling for an overhaul of the Centers for Disease Control. In the video, a tuxedo-clad Wakefield strolls through the ball declaring it a very exciting time and briefly narrates his efforts to find influential people to talk about his proposals. Quote, "Just looking around to see if there is anyone important here. See if I can prevail upon them to make the world a better place for children with autism, a safer place for children. What we need now is a huge shake-up at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. A huge shake-up. We need that to change dramatically," unquote. If this sounds depressingly familiar, and you realize that the same forces in play driving the US political process are finding a home in healthcare. And principally, they get a toehold in the process because vaccines are a victim of their own success. Vaccines have reduced the diseases that killed, disfigured, and disabled millions of people just a generation or two ago. In some cases, the diseases have all but been wiped out. Because these diseases are now so rare, we've stopped worrying about them. Diseases whose names would have struck fear into people, especially parents, 2 or 3 generations ago. They've disappeared from our consciousness, but they haven't disappeared from our environment. They're still able to get, they haven't been able to get a foothold because so many people are vaccinated. This is the herd vaccination. There is a minute risk involved with vaccination, but it's so low to be almost negligible. Children who get measles have a 1 in 20 chance of developing serious complications. However, serious complications from the vaccine number 1 or 2 per million. The herd vaccination, which protects the unvaccinated, requires that 90 to 95% of us be vaccinated. Those that cannot be vaccinated include the very young, cancer patients, and those whose immune system has been depressed. It also protects those who choose not to be vaccinated. It's not as if vaccinated children are shouldering the risk for the unvaccinated. That risk is just too low. The only thing unvaccinated children are doing is destroying the herd immunity and putting the lives of those unable to be vaccinated at risk. Besides the 1 in 20 chance of developing complications from having from the measles vaccine, after the measles disease, you have a long-term suppression of the immune system. Makes you more susceptible to diseases in the long term. And remember, when the vaccination stops, the herd immunity is lost, and these diseases return. I'm sure you've all heard about the situation in Washington State. In Clark County, in Washington State, which is where the cluster of the outbreaks have occurred, vaccination rates fell to 78%, and herd immunity disappeared. Now, of the 53 confirmed measles cases, 47 were not vaccinated, and the vaccination status of the remaining 6 could not be verified. Now, religion comes very quickly when the risks are tangible, and it might knock on your door any day. Orders for measles vaccines in Clark County were up nearly 500% in January compared to the same month last year, jumping from 530 doses to 3,150. We've come a long way, but there are people in this day and age who are quite comfortable making a living or rising in political power, scaring us. The inability to distinguish good information from bad is one of the products of our reliance on social media for information. Parents are put in a very difficult position because of this. Sensationalist misinformation about additives in the vaccine abound on social media, while the scientific responses are quietly noted in quite dull sites like the CDC. trust in reputable institutions has been eroded by the ability for anyone to publish anything and give it a patina of credibility. Uncertainty is the result. Inaction and deferring the decision to vaccinate is a lot more easily justified when there is uncertainty. And in the end, it puts us, our kids, and especially our grandkids at risk. Thank you.
Woo, okay, so, we'll take questions. There might be some of you here that disagree. Just ask a question. More questions than pontificating, please. Let's learn more from Phil. So as some of you are doing, raise your hands. A mic will be brought to you. Please stand up. Hold the mic very close to your mouth. Thank you. Right here.
Is there any scientific reasoning against administering the MMR vaccine separately?
There is none. In fact, in Japan, they do this. Japan took the results of Wakefield's study to heart. They were the first to remove mercury from vaccines. Now, there is no more mercury in the single-dose vaccines. That doesn't exist. But they, and incidentally, the rate of autism didn't change after the mercury was reduced. They now give them separately. There is a slight increase in the incidence of the other vaccines while waiting to get the other diseases while waiting to get the other vaccines. But you're right, no. And if what's called vaccine hesitant parents, if they wanted them to be given separately, I would support that without doubt.
Right here.
Enjoyed your presentation.
Okay.
I'm a retired Canadian physician, and I was a recipient of some of the fallout from this bogus report in the Lancet. 2 points I'd like to make. One is that on numerous occasions, I had ask a question.
Go ahead. Don't pay attention to David. He's going to take it away from you?
But thank you. Yeah.
Oh. I want to hear. Okay. He's the boss.
Phil, would you be in favor of some sort of regulatory oversight of the internet? This kind of thing is not where social media is used to proffer bogus information. So would you be in favor of something like that?
I heard an interesting quote actually this morning on the news. It said that Trump and Zuckerberg are two blades of a pair of scissors slicing through the truth. It is a very difficult question. I noticed a couple of days ago, I think a few sites have tried to limit the amount of misinformation out there. It's very difficult. How do we permit someone to validly state their position and not infringe on their freedom of speech, and yet recognize how damaging that freedom of speech could be? I don't know what the answer is to the effect of social media and our information, but you can see what it's doing not only in healthcare but in our political process and everything else. It's a very difficult question.
Could you explain to us how herd immunity works?
When 90 to 95%
How herd immunity works.
How herd immunity works, yeah. When 90 to 95% of the people are vaccinated, your chance of coming into contact, let's say this group here, 90 to 95% are vaccinated, and someone comes in from abroad who has the measles vaccine. I'm sorry, I keep meaning to, yeah, okay, I apologize, yeah. They come in from a country where measles is endemic. Okay, they're going to mix with you people. Now, the chance of them encountering someone who is unvaccinated is reduced by, 1 in 20, right? If that person, if he's unlucky enough to meet that person, again, that person has a diminished capacity to spread the disease. It just cannot get, there's not enough unvaccinated people for it to allow the spread. Have I explained that right? Yeah, so it's just a question of density of unvaccinated people preventing an endemic.
Okay, back here and then over in the gazebo.
I saw on the news there's a major outbreak of measles in the Philippines where I guess vaccination rates were low. Do you know what's happening there? And is it the measles vaccine or the MMR that they're trying to promote?
I'm sorry, I have no idea I've heard this about the Philippines, but the situation in Europe has been, a similar thing has happened. It's been discredited. The measles rate rise. It's a very simple formula.
Okay, right here in the red.
Oh,
Bill.
Yeah.
It's because of vaccine non-availability. They're in the Philippines. There are about 7,000 children got measles, of which 70 died. But the problem in the Philippines was non-availability of the vaccine, not that you had a lot of anti-vaxxers.
Okay, thank you very much.
She is also a retired doctor.
And can I mention also that this person here was also instrumental in removing smallpox.
Single-handedly.
Single-handedly. She's so humble.
And a good actress.
But yes.
Yeah.
Bill,
Oh yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Probably the most vulnerable group in our society in terms of needing guidance and leadership are our children. Is there some point, you think, where the value, medically proven value of a procedure trumps, pardon my pun, trumps the power of a parent to withhold that vaccination?
Well, it is legal to drink, but it's not legal to drink and drive. And that law, not to drink and drive, is not to protect you, it's to protect everyone else. And so we accept every day laws that, inhibit our freedoms, impede our freedoms. In the case of vaccines, do you remember the case of Typhoid Mary? The poor woman, was held in isolation for 23 years, did nothing wrong. And yet she killed 3 people, at least, that we know of, infected scores more. And what do we do with her freedom? The balance has to be struck where if it affects the community in general, it has to trump the individual, especially when, in this case, the risk is negligible. And I understand the concern of the parents. There's the right to do it's my child. I should have the right to say what happens. And also there's the argument from purity. My baby is pure. I don't want you injecting him with stuff. But in the end, it is a question of protecting everybody.
Question in the gazebo?
As another retired physician in an senior community, could you comment on the discrediting of pneumonia or flu vaccine and its validity and protection?
The ammonia as an additive?
No, pneumonia is a vaccine.
Oh, pneumonia, I'm sorry.
The pneumonia
sorry,
flu vaccine.
Ammonia. The flu vaccine is a tricky one because it's not quite as successful as we'd like it to be. And And I suppose a lot of you say, well, I had the flu vaccine and I got flu. And, you know, the flu vaccine mutates quite quickly. And there are two dominant strains. And in order to produce the vaccine, epidemiologists and scientists, immunologists have to predict the strain that is going to be dominant. I don't think this is answering your question, but it's so the, you know, if they guess wrong, you know, the protection rate can drop down to below 30%. So you get your flu vaccine and you still get the flu. It's just not, the flu vaccine is a very difficult vaccine. It is a very different virus to control. I'm sorry, I don't think I answered your question.
The pneumonia
but that's
one.
all I know.
What about the pneumonia vaccine for seniors?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. Okay.
No. No,
Yeah.
no.
We have.
Oh, hi. Is this working?
Where
I'll
are
see
we?
you.
Oh.
Going back to the issue of rights.
Yeah?
Where we live in Canada, we were just looking at the news, and our school district is looking at making a policy where children that aren't vaccinated will not be allowed to go to the public school.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean they can't be schooled at home or go to a private school, but I think that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you can, you know, quarantine people. That's another alternative, but, you know, hardly an acceptable one.
That was our last question.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Phil will be up here. You can come and mob him and ask him whatever you'd like. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you where? Club Exotica next week. Please turn on your phones if you're so inclined. Stack your chairs, pick up your coffee cups and shawls.